Well, if you're watching on YouTube, you can see me playing the world's tiniest violin for one of our dear, dear friends, Nick Saban. Why exactly am I throwing him this massive pity party? I'll explain on today's edition of Locked On LSU.
You are Locked On LSU, your daily podcast on the LSU Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Well, thank you for making Locked On LSU your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcast, whatever your preferred podcast platform is. If that's Spotify, that's mine personally. Music, you might like Amazon Music, you might like Podbean, whatever that might be, you can find us there. You can also find us on YouTube at Locked On LSU. And if you're a fan of Locked On LSU content, make sure you subscribe to the YouTube page because you'll get a notification as soon as the podcast drop. And I know that you do not want to miss a single second of your Locked On LSU content. But I'm Caroline Fenton, and I'm your host, as I am every day. I graduated from LSU in 2019 from the Manship School of Mass Communication, and that brought me here to Nashville, where I now host a sports talk radio show on ESPN 1025 The Game. Now, I am not naive that you probably know the biggest storyline in college football today. I was at a hockey press conference today, and even that, and it was that's what everyone was talking about at a hockey press conference, was what's been going down with Jimbo Fisher and Nick Saban and all of this piping a hot tea that's been going on surrounding the SEC. And I want to get to that. I promise I do. I understand that I'm bearing the lead a little bit here. I have one note that I want to touch on first, and then I promise I'll get into that situation, exactly what's going on and how that affects LSU. Before we get into that, big announcement made yesterday that LSU, in their first game of the season on Sunday, September 4th, facing Florida State in New Orleans, that will be a primetime kickoff. So the All-State Louisiana kickoff set for 6:30 p.m. Central, airing on ABC in primetime on Sunday, September 4th. Their season opener. Now, that's not Florida State's season opener. They played Duquesne the week before, but LSU will be coming in fresh for that primetime kickoff. So I think we all remember the last time that LSU played the Superdome. They hoisted a national championship trophy. So do not let me down this time around, LSU, since they're making a return to the Superdome. So, okay, I mean, by now I'm sure you know that this is the kickoff time. This is the date. This is the opponent. This isn't necessarily new news for you, but I kind of wanted to share with you my perspective of it and why I love just pretty much everything about this. First and foremost, football's back. So let's just get that out of the way. That's the obvious here. But what else do I love about this entire situation? One, I love the fact that LSU is opening their season with Florida State. I understand Florida State been on a little bit of a downturn the past couple of years once they shifted into the Mike Norvell era. But it's always, to me, so anticlimactic whenever LSU opens their season with, East, West, South Carolina, Upstate, State, College, Polytechnic, AT&T. It's so anticlimactic to start your season that way. And it's not really the best barometer necessarily for exactly how good your team is or where your team is at. Because if you blow out Mercer in the first week of the season, then great, you did your job. That's what you're supposed to do. LSU was supposed to blow out Mercer. And it doesn't have the same hype and buzz and excitement surrounding it whenever you're playing a cupcake or a directional state school rather than a football powerhouse historically like Florida State. I mean, you look at when LSU played Wisconsin a few years ago, when LSU played BYU in New Orleans a few years ago, when they played Miami and Dallas, when they played UCLA. I know they didn't open their season with UCLA, but still just kind of that early in the season, out of conference, big time marquee matchup. I love that. I think it brings so much more hype to the start of the season. And I also think it's so much better of a barometer to see where LSU is at. I know, for example, I was at that game in Dallas when LSU played Miami. Miami was so overhyped that season. Miami was very heavily favored. I remember on College Game Day that day, every single picker on College Game Day picked Miami to win. LSU ultimately won, as you know. And I think that was like the first time that I was like, okay, let's go. In 2018, LSU is going to be legit. And they were. I mean, they had a 10-win season that year, went 10-3 that season, won the Fiesta Bowl. So I do think, I know it's early in the season, and I know that a lot of things can change throughout the course of the season, but I do think that it's a good landmark point to say, okay, if my team beats a team like a Miami, a BYU, a Wisconsin, which they didn't, and a Florida State, for example, then you kind of get a good vibe for where your team is at. Y'all feel me? Way more so than a Texas State, Fresno.com. I digress. The other thing that I love about this game is that all eyes will be on this game. It's Sunday night. That's the only college football game on in that time slot on a Sunday night. The NFL games don't kick off until the next week, so there may be some NFL preseason games. But really, if you're a football fan, you're going to be watching this game, which is what I love. Since there has been so much talk surrounding LSU in the offseason in Kelly era, so many doubts, and I think doubts is the right word to use about Brian Kelly at LSU, about what this LSU team can be. I mean, you look at the last time everyone saw LSU, they were playing fewer than 40 scholarship players with a wide receiver at quarterback against Kansas State in their bowl game. And I mean, LSU kind of got embarrassed. And I know that was for us, it was easy for me to just brush that game off just because I knew that, LSU didn't have a coach. LSU didn't have a quarterback. LSU didn't have a damn thing out on that field. So it is good that night, all eyes will be on LSU in prime time on a Sunday. It's not going to be one of those games on a Saturday where there's 5, 6, 7 different options for a college football game and that time slot. It's going to be the one and only. LSU is going to be the only one playing on that game leading into Memorial Day. And I love that. I mean, it's a huge opportunity for LSU to really show off who and what they are. Even more so than LSU as a whole, I think it's a wonderful opportunity for Brian Kelly to make a statement. Because all of the people who have had their doubts about Brian Kelly at LSU, all the people who have had their doubts about this team as a whole, this is an opportunity for Brian Kelly to go out there against this Florida State team, make a statement, show off what LSU can be, who LSU is. I just think all around, it's a great opportunity for people to watch LSU. It's a great opportunity for LSU to show off who they are, to show off what they are, and especially being in their own backyard. I mean, this is going to be an LSU home game. I know that if you live in Louisiana or anywhere close, you're going to be at that game. I mean, it truly is LSU's backyard. So it's going to be an LSU home game. I love everything about it. Brian Kelly opened his season last year against Florida State in that time slot. So although all things considered, everything's very fresh and very new with a new team and a new Florida State team. But overall, just a really great opportunity for LSU to be in prime time, to be in their backyard, to be the only team on, to be the only game on. I think is a great opportunity, and I'm really looking forward to being there. But all right, enough of that. Let's get into the tea. Let's get into the drama. Let's get into the gossip. I want to get into what went on between two very powerful coaches in college football and how that affects LSU. I want to get into that coming up next. But before we do that, I want to tell you about BetOnline. Because our partners at BetOnline continue to be the number one source for all of your sports betting needs and sports information. You can find all the latest odds, news, and sports developments, including this year's NBA basketball playoffs, Major League Baseball scores, fights, and even next season's NFL futures. I have been looking at the Denver Broncos with great odds across all sports books, but also in BetOnline. I would stay away from it. That's my expert opinion. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. I would stay away from it. I just don't necessarily believe in this Denver Broncos team. But hey, it's worth sprinkling some money on it if it's an NFL future because it's going to have pretty great odds. But BetOnline is your continued source for all of your sporting wagering information from live betting, playoffs, esports, and more. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action. BetOnline, where the game starts. So the press conference and the media availability heard around the world. So I think we have all heard it at this point of Nick Saban. I'll start with, the timeline of exactly what happened. Nick Saban had an availability. He had a speaking event in Birmingham, to which he was talking about his football team, the progression of the team, Bryce Young, NIL, so on and so forth. And there was one chunk of the speaking event that he was talking about NIL in particular. He was talking about how the way that NIL has gone, it's going against the way that NIL was originally supposed to be made or originally intended to be. He mentions the collectives, and I've talked about them on the podcast. Collectives are essentially groups of boosters or groups that collect money from boosters that then funnel that into NIL deals with potential recruits. So it's really essentially just telling recruits, hey, we'll pay you this flat, earnings fee. Let's say $100,000 from this collective of money built in from boosters. If you do a social media video, if you do a media appearance, whatever that may be, you get paid for it. That's not necessarily what NIL is. NIL is more so Bo Nix's deal with Milo's Sweet Tea. But Nick Saban called out Texas A&M and Jimbo Fisher and the program as a whole for utilizing collectives. This is exactly what Nick Saban had to say. I'm sure you heard it before, but I'll play it for you now.
And you've read about them. You know who they are. I mean, we were second in recruiting last year. A&M was first. A&M bought every player on their team, made a deal for name, image, and likeness. All right, we didn't buy one player. All right, but I don't know if we're going to be able to sustain that in the future because more and more people are doing it.
So essentially accusing Texas A&M of buying their players. Now, that's the one thing within NIL, since there are so few rules and there isn't a cap, there are so few guidelines. The one thing that NIL isn't is paying to play. There has to be some sort of kind of quid pro quo situation where I give you something and you give me something in return. So Nick Saban is essentially calling out Texas A&M for buying their players. I have a thought on that before we get to the rebuttal. Cry me a freaking river, Nick Saban. Cry me a freaking river. Every team does it. Every team did it before it was allowed. You did it, Nick Saban. You did it before it was allowed. We are not naive to that. Nick Saban, to me, it sounds like he's complaining that every other team now has a chair at the table that he created. Nick Saban, in that media availability, talked about the parity of college football and how that went away, about how every weight room or access to tutors or whatever that may be, nutrition plan, so on and so forth, in college football, was equal and you had an equal opportunity. And now in NIL, the teams with more wealthy boosters or the teams with more access to money can now get the more recruits. I mean, sorry, this is the way that it's going. This is the new era of college football, and you can either put up with it or get out of it. And I think that Nick Saban is just frustrated that now the only pull in recruiting, it isn't the flashy trophies and it isn't the weight rooms and it isn't the access to tutors. It's now money. Money talks. And Nick Saban does not want to listen. I thought it was so weak on Nick Saban's part. And this is another reason why. I remember around this time last year, kind of leading into the 2021 season, Nick Saban had a radio appearance and he was flaunting Bryce Young's seven-figure essential salary coming from his NIL deals. He was saying how he touted that so heavily as a testament to how great of a player Bryce Young is. And now fast forward a year later and he is criticizing the big-time NIL deals. Give me a break, Nick Saban. And I'm not just saying this because it's Nick Saban. And I think we all, have our feelings about Nick Saban. It's not about Nick Saban at all. It's the fact that he is being so blatantly hypocritical about this whole NIL deal because he was someone that I have to think that he also did it before it was legal. We're not naive to that. We know that happened before it was allowed. And I just think the way that he was speaking, he's just frustrated that now everyone has the opportunity at these big time recruits. And now the pull isn't just trophies. It's also money. And sorry, Nick Saban, but that's the way that things are going. But the best part of this entire situation was Jimbo Fisher's rebuttal, because he was not going to hear his name called out or his team's name called out and not go down without a fight. So Jimbo Fisher called a press conference at 10 a.m. on Thursday morning to address all of it. And he essentially sat down and had like an 8-minute soliloquy and just went off on Nick Saban. And I have a short clip that I'll play for you, but for the gist of it was basically saying that Nick Saban did pay his players, that Jimbo Fisher does not have a relationship with Nick Saban anymore, that he's hypocritical. He called him a narcissist. Wow. He said that he should have been slapped as a child. Said, if I was a liar and a cheater, my dad would have slapped me as a child. Maybe he should have been slapped more as a child, is essentially what he said in a nutshell. He called him every word in the book. He said that we don't communicate anymore. He said that we are done. Our relationship is done. And every time, it was actually really funny. Every time a reporter tried to ask a question, he would just insert these jabs at Nick Saban. Like, he didn't even want to listen to the questions. He just wanted to get it off his chest. This is one little nugget of the Jimbo Fisher press conference.
Funny. In that talk, right before he said that about us, wasn't he soliciting funds from the crowd? It's amazing, wasn't it?
To the left, Rob.
When you walk on water, I guess it don't matter.
You kind of heard it there. A reporter tried to get a question in. He just talked right over him. And he mentioned, everyone looks at Nick Saban like he's some sort of god. I believe he called him the czar of college football. But basically, without revealing secrets, Jimbo Fisher admitted that there are secrets to be revealed. So, Jimbo Fisher just absolutely sounded off on Nick Saban and just the hypocrisy of his words. And also, I do think the one point I think is very important that Jimbo Fisher pointed out is you can take jabs at me all day. You can take jabs at my program all day. But really, at the end of the day, Nick Saban was criticizing these 16, 17, 18-year-old kids who are being recruited by these college football programs. I don't blame a single player for wanting to go where there is the most money. Of course, there's more money in the NFL. I think we all know that. And Alabama produces a whole heck of a lot of NFL football players. But I don't blame kids who may have grown up with nothing, that are offered a ton of money from one school over another, and they want to take advantage of that. I think they have every right. If they've earned it, they have every single right to do that. And shame on Nick Saban for saying that Texas A&M didn't do things the right way, or that Alabama does things the right way, just because they don't take advantage of this new era of NIL. He doesn't like the collectives. Well, that's, pre the NCAA coming out and saying no collectives, it was allowed. So that's really just a disadvantage on Alabama's part for not taking advantage of it. I think collectives have kind of been a subset of one part of NIL that I disagree with, but the rules are the rules, and there's no rule the rule that said you couldn't, So I don't blame Jimbo Fisher for taking advantage of those things. But okay, you've heard the stories, you've heard the national broadcast, you've heard it on Twitter. You know what's gone down between Saban and Jimbo Fisher. How exactly does that affect LSU? I want to talk about that coming up next. But before we do that, I want to tell you about Built Bar, because who doesn't love brownies? I absolutely love brownies. I love all sorts of desserts. But what's even better than eating brownies or kind of licking the spatula from the bowl of the brownie mix is also being healthy. Because you can do both, and you are in luck because Built Bar has this new creation, and it is better than ever. I had a birthday cake Built Bar puff this morning. The brownie batter, I think, in my opinion, is even better. The puff, which is a protein-infused marshmallow, takes protein bars to an entirely new level. And the good thing is they're available right now at Built.com. Try the Built Puffs, because if you haven't, I really don't know what you're waiting for. They're a chocolate-covered marshmallow protein bar. They've only got 140 calories, 17 grams of protein, and only 7 grams of sugar. The Brownie Batter Puffs are the perfect pick-me-up for any day. And just throw one in your purse, throw one in your pocket, throw one in your car, and you're set to jet. You're good to go with snacks for the rest of the day. All Built Puffs are covered in 100% real chocolate, and that means you can be healthy too, but you can also enjoy it. Plus, the collagen protein that's in the puffs is better for your body and absorbs more efficiently, and it has a ton of health benefits. So if you take collagen supplements, I know I have in the past, just to help my hair grow, to help my skin look nice and healthy, you can get the collagen that you need through the Built Bar Puffs. So the Brownie Butter Puffs will have you completely forgetting that you were even eating a protein bar, because they are so delicious. So go to Built.com to get Brownie Batter Puffs right now. Go to Built.com and use promo code LOCK15, get 15% off your order. Use promo code LOCK15 for 15% off at Built.com. Well, thank you for making Locked On LSU your first listen every day. Make sure to go check out Locked On NBA Big Board. Host Rafael Barlow from NBA Draft Junkies and author of the NBA Big Board newsletter is joined by Richard Stamen, Sam Ferris, and Lee Thulin, giving fans an in-depth look into the NBA draft, mock draft, player rankings, and of course, the big boards. It is free and available wherever you get your podcasts. So of course, the Saban and the Jimbo tea, the gossip, the drama, the essentially rocket shot, nuclear shot that Jimbo Fick. I love the sass. Good for Jimbo for standing up for himself. Shame on Nick Saban for trying to shame anyone into, not taking advantage of the opportunity that's presented to you. But there's a role that LSU plays in this, and there are a few things that I've thought about. Number one, this is actually a question that I asked on my radio show today. How could this potentially affect transfer portal and recruiting? Because I've talked about it before with Dabo Sweeney. Whenever he came out and said he doesn't believe in NIL, remember a couple years ago when he said once the players get paid, I'll leave college football. Well, he's still here. And I said that if I'm a college football player and I am being recruited by the best teams in the country, Clemson, LSU, Alabama, Florida, so on and so forth, then why would I feel the need to go play for a coach who isn't for me making money? I would look at that and say, okay, well, you're making multi-million dollars a year. Why can't I? I wouldn't want to necessarily go play for that coach. I look at the situation and kind of the feud, and really at the end of the day, it is nothing more than just a feud. I fully believe that this is less about NIL and less about money and more about power and control and influence, at least on Nick Saban's end. I look at this kind of feud that's going down, and if I'm a recruit, I wonder, is this the best program for me to go? Both Alabama and Texas A&M. If Nick Saban is a coach that has been pretty strict on NIL deals, we're in the age, and like I said, money talks. We are in the age where a player has every right to go wherever he makes the most money. We don't blame NFL players for that. Of course, the ultimate goal for college football players is to make it to the NFL. But if my options are Alabama, Texas A&M, and LSU, I could probably make it to the NFL going to any of those schools. So why would I entertain the fact or the idea of going to a school where my coach necessarily won't be totally on board with NIL deals? I understand Nick Saban is the best college football coach to ever do it. And you know that tastes like vinegar coming out of my mouth, but it's true. And I've always looked at it like if you had the opportunity to go to Alabama, you have to take it, because the opportunity to learn from Nick Saban, the opportunity to play for Alabama, it's a great opportunity. But now there are more opportunities on the board rather than just playing time or development or having that letter on your chest. Money's also included. So I do wonder, do recruits look at Alabama and Nick Saban and think, if I can't make the most money here, why would I go here? And then I also look at Texas A&M. If you're listening to Nick Saban say those things, you may ask yourself, is Texas A&M doing things by the book? Am I going to get in trouble if I go to Texas A&M? If the NCAA is coming out and saying you may no longer make money this way, and that's how Texas A&M has been paying their players, am I going to get in trouble for that? So I think there are two ends of the spectrum here. If you're a recruit, you want to make sure that you are getting taken care of. If that's just the age of college football that we're in, you want to make sure that you are getting, the best deal that you can get, while also, developing yourself and giving yourself the best opportunity to go to the NFL. Are you also, looking out for yourself, both financially and in the way that you do things by the book in the NCAA? I think where LSU comes in this is that these are their two in-division rivals. These are two SEC West rivals. If there's a recruit that just doesn't want to deal with some of the BS and gossip that's kind of been going down the past couple of days, I wouldn't blame them. And if I'm Brian Kelly, I swoop in and I say, we'd be happy to have you at LSU. We fully embrace NIL deals and we do it by the book. Nobody's calling us out for our NIL deals. None of our coaches are calling out other programs or calling out football plus 17-year-old football players for trying to make more money. We do things by the book and we'll get you money. We'll get you paid. And I also think the second caveat to this in terms of LSU is, thank goodness they're just staying quiet. I think with this, you can let those coaches talk. You can let those coaches argue. In the end, I really do think it's kind of a bad look. I do applaud Jimbo for standing up for himself, but I think overall this whole situation is just petty and kind of a bad look. So if I'm Brian Kelly, I sit back, and really the rest of the LSU football coaching staff and LSU football as a whole, I sit back, I let them do their talking, and I just continue to do my thing because it's been working pretty well. But I do wonder how this will affect potentially recruiting. transfer portals. And Greg Sankey came out today, publicly reprimanded them for it. That's a slap on the wrist. That's nothing more than just Greg Sankey saying, don't do that. But I do wonder in the future how this could escalate, how this could be just kind of like a snowball effect. And if that really could, in the long run, or even in the short term, negatively affect Alabama and Texas A&M. And if they could be cannibalizing themselves and being two completely different programs in the way that they look at NIL, and if that's a way that LSU can come in and capitalize on recruits, on transfer portals, and really just continuing to advertise and hype up the fact that they are completely, totally, 100% pro NIL. Honestly, I love this for LSU. Stay out of the negative press, stay out of the drama, keep your head down, keep doing your thing. Let Saban and Jimbo do the talking. But that is going to do it for me today. Thank you for making Locked On LSU your first listen every day. And to make your second listen Locked On SEC, you can get all of your daily SEC news in less than 30 minutes with SEC expert Chris Gordy. It's free and available wherever you get your podcasts. Now, coming up tomorrow, on tomorrow's edition of Locked On LSU, Brian Kelly, speak of the devil, spoke with ESPN.com about some of his struggles of building the roster. We'll break that down. Maybe in the future, he won't have as much trouble building that roster. Why? We'll get into that tomorrow.